And it's horrible because I felt like I was yelled at as a child. So
Mm,
I like it was my abusive parents again yelling at me, and I become cryy and silent and terrified. So it's a bad dynamic. I have to
yes.
get to the place where you just spoke about.
Yes, absolutely. And then, so again, just making believe you were here with me doing couples therapy, right? With this guy who, and I think most people can relate. This might be a boyfriend or a husband. It can be anybody. You see, it's
Right.
interchangeable. What I would help you do then is help you begin to process what I would call sort of, like that old trauma that you described has not yet been put to rest. You see how quickly it comes alive, right?
Right.
And then now you're having your own trauma. Yes, that's right. You're having your own traumatic experience then.
Yes.
So we would have to do a little work on that as well. Sure.
Wow.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Narcissism Decoder. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Mazzella. In this episode, you will again hear a live interview I had with Tami from the Ageless 50-plus community. In this part of the interview, the focus is on dealing with individuals who exhibit narcissistic traits, particularly when they have low self-esteem. Also, through a spontaneous role play with Tami, I try to demonstrate how to talk to an angry, dysregulated person in your life. The main points include the importance of helping such individuals become aware of their reactions and responses without inflaming or insulting them. The discussion emphasizes the necessity of not labeling or blaming the angry or dysregulated other. Anyway, there's much more here, but why don't we just get right into the live interview? This segment offers practical insights and techniques that I hope you will find to be helpful. Can I just say one more word about the intolerance? Because you had asked about how do we help somebody like that? And I won't go too far with it, but the first thing I said is helping them become more aware of it, right? And then some of your listeners may be asking, like, how do you do that in a way that you don't inflame them or insult them or put them into what we call a narcissistic rage, right?
Right.
So one way, and I'm just sort of free associating to your thoughts, Tami, so just bear with me. But one way is I could imagine is you can ask them, because I'm always a big fan of inquisitive questions to help somebody begin to develop a capacity to think, because they don't really think through things very well. But I can ask them, did you notice that you had a strong reaction to whatever it is, whatever example you have in your mind, Tami?
Yes.
Right? Did you notice that you had this reaction? Like, that's just the first step. Is there any level of awareness in terms of how you just responded to something that I said? Now, they may say, well, that's because you say things that are so stupid. Right? I don't know. I'm making this up, but you can picture this, right?
Right.
And you could say to them then, but did you notice that you didn't really even think about what I said? And you were so quick to put me down and to call it stupid and to devalue it.
Right.
And I wonder, what's so threatening? What's so scary about really just thinking about what I had to say? Well, that's not scary. I'm not scared. Don't call me scared. No, but you react as if you are. Like you shoot like so quickly at me, like you're under threat or something. Again, I'm just making this up, but I wanted to just demonstrate to your listeners how we could begin to talk to somebody if you are in a relationship with somebody like this.
Right.
And this goes back to your initial question is, can they change? Yes, they could change if we could talk to them in a different way, not label them, not get reactive with them, not become dysregulated when they become dysregulated.
That's very hard.
It's hard, but you know what makes it a little bit easier is understanding why it is that they're doing these things. Because if you could really understand that they're doing it in order to protect, to your point earlier, like their self-esteem, then you don't feel so threatened. And if you're not threatened, you're in a more regulated state of mind. And it makes it just a little bit easier to be curious and to talk to them, if that makes sense.
Yes. Because I always felt there was a string ready to be pulled and ignited.
Mm-hmm.
And I never wanted to ignite that string. So you become silent, you hold things in.
Yeah.
I have an example when I was doing a podcast, I had to sign something, and I go by my maiden name, but my legal name is Capice, even though I'm not married. I just kept the married name. So when I was signing it, it spell checked and wrote, instead of Tami Capice, tampon Capice. And I thought that was hysterical. So I shared it. I said, when I was signing something to do a podcast and it wrote tampon Capice, good thing I caught it and I was rolling. And instead of laughing, I got, you just signed crap willy-nilly. What the hell are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And a huge explosion. So tampon Capice sat there silent in shock and not knowing what to say or do.
Yeah. So again, I'm just stepping into a role play with you, just making believe. Okay.
Okay.
So if you yourself aren't too overwhelmed with the attack, you could step back and you could say to this person, whoa, hold on a second. What's going on right now? What's happening?
Right.
Like, you notice that you're attacking me over this?
Right.
And then I don't know if you want to play it out, but you see what I'm doing is I'm trying to get a little distance and say, slow this down. What's happening? What did you hear? Or what did you see? Like, I'm trying to understand why so reactive?
And then he would have probably said, because you're so stupid. You don't know what you're signing. Identity fraud. Something like that nature.
Yeah. So again, just to help us sort of conceptualize this a little bit, at that moment, what you could hear is somebody becomes very dysregulated. Whenever somebody starts using labels to describe something, right, or takes on this condescending tone, this is just for all your listeners, you can assume, and 99% of the time you will be right, that they are dysregulated. So anytime someone's in a dysregulated state like that, you can't talk to them in a reasonable way because they're the emotions are too aroused, too heightened. So the first order of business, again, going back to technique and how we help these people, Tami, is to help them get into a more regulated state of mind. And the way we do that is through words and language. And we try to understand, not condemn, not blame, but understand their experience in terms of why they're so angry and attacking you and devaluing you.
Right. And it's horrible because I felt like I was yelled at as a child. So I felt like it was my abusive parents again yelling at me, and I become cryy and silent and terrified. So it's a bad dynamic. I have to get to the place where you just spoke about.
Yes, absolutely. And then, so again, just making believe you were here with me doing couples therapy, right? With this guy who, and I think most people can relate. This might be a boyfriend or a husband. It can be anybody. You see, it's interchangeable. Right. What I would help you do then is begin to process what I would call sort of like that old trauma that you described has not yet been put to rest. You see how quickly it comes alive, right? Right. And then now you're having your own trauma. Yes, that's right. You're having your own traumatic experience then. Yeah. So we would have to do a little work on that as well. Sure.
Wow.
What's the wow? What were you thinking?
The work on me as well with the own traumatic experience. Both of us. A lot of work.
Yes, Tami, that's right. And I'm glad you said wow, because again, in my biased opinion, right, this is just from my own experience. And a lot of people do not like this because it's much easier to blame or to think that your husband is the narcissist and he's the one that needs to change. But when you said, wow, I think what you recognized is these relationships are really complicated. It's not just as simple as like, you know, my raging narcissistic husband needs to change, which is true. That's part of the story, but the story's a little more complicated.
Right. A lot complicated.
And that goes back to the first thing you said when you opened up your podcast is there's so much on these, what was it, like forums, I think you said, where they're just condemning the narc, right?
Yeah. Yes. Condemning. They'll never change. They all cheat. They're dirtbags. I mean, mine did not cheat. So let's talk about that. They all don't.
No, they don't all cheat. Those things that you just described, it's a lot easier, believe it or not. It's a lot easier just to blame somebody.
I get
it. Really think about something like I just said when you said, wow, that's more complicated. Life is easy when you have good guys and bad guys, right?
Right.
That keeps everything nice and neat. There's no nuance to things that you really need to think about. It's just simple that this is the bad guy and he needs to change or he'll never change. So therefore I need to leave or something like that. But, you know, I think you understand what I mean. It's the goal is to keep it simple.
Yes. And when I left, he wanted to go to counseling, my dream, but I never spoke up, which made me at fault as well, just like you said, because he's not a mind reader. And I could never speak because I was too frightened in my trauma of my childhood. So I was a child and taking on the yelling and becoming silent. And that's not what I wanted. It's not good for you. It's not good for the relationship either.
Yeah.
So, yes. So that is, you have to speak up. You have to tell them what you want and what you need. And they can choose to change, fight for the relationship or not. Or then there you have your answer right there.
Yes. Yep. That's right. That's right.
And I'd also like to ask is, why do they get mad when you can't figure things out? Like, for instance, I cannot do anything technical. I can't figure out where to plug what is that called? The HDMI cable into the right, whatever, plug. I don't know anything, but I'm supposed to learn. I am an ex-chef. I can make bagels from scratch. I know how to work with yeast. He can't. I can teach him. So how about teach me? Or if I can, just explain nicely to me. Don't get mad when I cannot figure something out of how to plug in a wire, for goodness sake. So
Yeah. So the devil's in the details. So the details of these stories are so important for me to give a somewhat decent answer. When you couldn't plug in the cable, why did that cable need to be plugged in? Like, was it your need or was it his need? Like, who was using?
My TV wasn't working or something.
Okay. So there is the beginning of the answer in terms of why it becomes enraging. Because what you just did then is you expressed the need in the relationship. Okay. Now, earlier I had mentioned to you, there are different types there are different types of narcissistic relationships, in couples, but there are also different clusters of narcissism. And you probably heard of some of these, like the grandiose narcissist. There's the paranoid. There's what they call the covert. In my field, this is what we call the craving narcissist. But if you're with somebody, a cluster of narcissism that has a feeling or a sense that in the relationship, you should be taking care of them. Naturally, then, when you, Tami, express a need, it's like an outrage to them because why should they be taking care of you? You see, you're putting a demand on them now to take care of them. To take care of you. And that's not what they signed up for in this particular type of narcissism.
Really? Because he's great electrically, like an electrician, even though he's not. He figures things out. So I'm thinking that's your job. I'll show you how to do something. You show me how to do something. I'm not electrically inclined, and I probably will never be, and you're going to have to accept that. That's my thought.
Yeah, listen, all that is what you're describing is very reasonable. Like you're using a reasonable mind, a rational mind to say this. But if you could imagine that if somebody exists with a fantasy that they're going to be taken care of, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could imagine, I think, that when someone expresses a need, it's like putting a demand on them to take care of something instead of being taken care of. And that's enraging. And who knows? I don't know if you knew this fellow's history, but who knows? Maybe he grew up with a caregiver who expected a lot or was always very intrusive or put a lot of demands on him. Do you see? I don't know. I'm just making this up, but it's possible then that his needs were never met, so that when someone expresses a need of their own, it's just an outrage because that's
Right.
why he's there.
Exactly. A lot of it has to do with his younger brother he was left alone with, that he was angry with. His younger brother was a little bit slow, and he never had tolerance for him. So,
Yeah. So that's okay. So, Tami, that's one level of the story. And that's what I meant before. Like when you get serious help, like if you're really serious about getting into this and saving your relationship, what you would slowly come to see is that you weren't just angry or upset or frustrated with your younger brother, right? But you were upset with a caregiver who left you alone and didn't need your needs and had expectations that you could take care of somebody else, right? Which is their job. It's not his job. He was just a kid.
Right.
That's enraging.
We all develop differently. I was left alone with my younger brother all the time. I think I was 5 and he was 3 or 2, screaming. And I never got enraged or had that emotion. It might have gotten me to have lower self-esteem, just left all the time. So it's funny how different we develop differently with almost the same experiences.
Yeah, but if you think about it, I don't want to get too personal with you. We can make this up like hypothetically. Mm-hmm. But what's the definition of self-esteem and why does one typically have low self-esteem? We have to get really close and understand what goes on inside of them to lower their self-esteem. In other words, what's the thought process that brings it down? And oftentimes they tell themselves things like, you're not good enough, or you're a failure, you're not pretty enough, you're not smart enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
our work.
Yeah, that's right. But I'm going to make a little bit of a leap, okay? So hold on to your chair. You may give me one of those wows again, like you did before. Okay. But Tami, you see, that is the anger then. This guy that you're describing just gets it out. He expresses it outward. You can see the anger. But one definition, and self-esteem is very complicated, so I don't want to oversimplify it, but one definition of self-esteem is if you're calling yourself all these names and making yourself to be such a failure,
right?
Guess what? There's the aggression. That's the anger, except you're attacking yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
Learn to hurt yourself, and you have to heal that. I've heard so much about healing the inner child work, and that whole thing. But you really have to heal that.
Yeah, and one way to heal it then is to get really close to that voice in your head that is so critical and devaluing and punishing.
Right. And give yourself self-love and self-esteem. Very important, I found.
Mm-hmm.
Energy work. And then the $1 million question is,
thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you found the discussion insightful and helpful, especially when dealing with challenging relationships. Remember, understanding the underlying dynamics, I have found, helps you maintain a compassionate, non-reactive approach, which again, in my own experience, can make a significant difference in terms of relating to somebody like this in your life. If you're interested in hearing more about this interview, please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next episode where Tami and I talk about her $1 million question. Okay, until next time, bye for now. Disclaimer alert. The Narcissism Decoder podcast is provided for general information purposes only. The content presented in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any psychological condition related to narcissism. The content on this podcast should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. For specific advice pertaining to narcissism or any other psychological condition, you could reach me directly. I am an experienced mental health practitioner who is always taking on new patients. If you would just like a consultation, I can do that too.